Welcome to the Predictable Revenue Podcast, where sales leaders teach you what's working for them and how you can build it yourself.
This episode of the Predictable Revenue Podcast is brought to you by our sales coaching and consulting services. Are you looking to create repeatable, scalable, and predictable revenue? We've helped thousands of companies grow their business with tailored expert advice backed by testing to ensure they establish the best practices that'll work for them. Head over to bit.ly/predictable revenue coaching to learn more.
Welcome back to the Predictable Revenue Podcast. I'm your host, Colin Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Jane Portman from UserList, and we're talking about email segmentation. Jane, welcome to the show.
Hi, Colin. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. I want to talk about, I know we're talking about email segmentation today, and we've got a listener group that's probably like, yeah, we know what that is. We're a bunch of salespeople, a bunch of sales development people. We've sent tons of email. I want to talk about, why don't we start with, with that context, why don't you tell me about the type of segmentation we're talking about today?
So we are talking about a very boring and unsexy part of every email marketing business, which is segmentation. And the reason why we're trying to draw like additional eyeballs and ears to this is because it's the best way to start your email marketing journey and the best way to like understand what you even should be doing there. And we've been running our business, an email automation platform for SaaS called UserList, for 5 years, and we had like hundreds, if not thousands, of conversations with customers, and it always boils down to the fact that not everybody knows what to do with the tool, and it's not just about paying for the platform, but knowing where to start, knowing that customer data matters, knowing that segments matter, and there is so many more technicalities than just setting up your campaigns. And fast forward 5 years, we think that segmentation is the place to start. So we're doing our best to publicize the topic.
Very cool. One of the reasons we thought it would be interesting to have Jane on the podcast here is I think we have a very sales-centered view, and I think sometimes it's great to bring in people that are close but related, like sales and marketing or sales development and marketing are kind of like cousins or brothers or sisters kind of thing. And then sales is sort of just a little bit on the other side. And so I'm super curious we're going to explore, what segmentation means and how you do it. And I'll be trying to bring the sales development, sales lens to the conversation, but recognizing that Jane's a founder here coming from the marketing side. And so there's value to all opinions, even though she's probably wrong. No, I'm just kidding.
I have heard that the best email automation people come from sales ops because the sales ops culture is more developed than marketing automation culture. I would not judge there, but it's an opinion I've heard.
Yeah. I marketing people have certainly been doing it for longer, just to play devil's advocate. As a salesperson, I started my career in sales 10 years ago. There wasn't a whole lot of segmentation going on when it was, here's the phone book, or here's the business phone book, or here's a list that we have, go for it. There's not tons of segmentation. You could even make the argument that there are a lot of sales orgs that don't do any or that aren't segmenting enough. Even though I've had conversations with plenty of people in the sales ops and sales development space that are just masters of segmentation. And I think some of the things that we've seen, it can lead to the greatest results. And so I'm curious, kind of pulling it back on you, talk to me about some criteria that you like to use when you're segmenting a list or a campaign.
So we operate with SaaS companies, and that's a special type of marketing because for other companies, you have leads, then they buy something, and then the story ends. And for SaaS products, the story just begins there. And there is user onboarding, there is middle of the cycle, customer loyalty, there are cancellations. So it's a whole journey that should be covered by email. And when marketers speak about segmentation, they can use a variety of criteria, from demographics to sign-up source to, something else. But there is one specific criteria that we'll advocate for, and that is the life cycle stage. So if you run email marketing for a SaaS company, you should clearly have a way to distinguish people based on where they are in your purchasing/customer journey. And that means understanding whether they're a lead, where they're active lead, when they're trial, a paying customer, canceled user. So if you get that linear journey right, and at most times it's pretty simple and linear, if you have enough data to do that, then the rest of your campaigns become a breeze to set up, because typically each segment has its own conversion goal, and it's much easier to approach it this way. Basically, somebody joining a segment is the most common trigger if we talk about automation. So lifecycle stage would be the most important criteria for us as SaaS marketers, and we recommend you to think about this from this angle.
Interesting. I mean, if I think through the context of sales development, everybody's stage is cold. cold or cold, possibly warm, because they came from marketing and sales development has been asked. And so I think like the piece here is like context is one of the most important. Or the segmentation is really not just the user segmentation from a account or a persona perspective, but really more of like, what is the context of the outreach? What is the context of why we're emailing them today?
Yeah. Why would it be always cold? You're still moving them through the stages of your sales funnel, aren't you? So people who are completely cold, people who might have maybe clicked the first link in your outreach sequence, and so on.
Yeah, I guess thinking just always from the starting point is almost always cold.
Yeah,
you're always
definitely
starting almost cold. I think like when I'm thinking about segments, or I think you generally think about segmenting a list of like going from your whole market, your TAM, SAM, SOM, all the way to like, okay, well, I'm going to segment it and pull out like a tiny sliver, which is like customer, company profile or company criteria, and persona criteria, so job title, seniority, etc. And then I think what we're talking about here is like one step further in segmenting based on the context or maybe their state. So it could be more than just the first two criteria, and we're talking about the sort of context.
It's usually like I mentioned before, marketers would imagine the giant pool of leads you have, let's say, and then you will just like pull out people who match specific criteria, like you mentioned, and they don't necessarily have to be coherent in any way. They don't have to be like adding to 100%. They're just like, this is a slice of people who joined via this lead magnet, therefore you can send them this campaign because it's relevant to them. And they're like, oh, now we should be targeting inactive users. Let's find inactive users. These are people who haven't done anything in 3 days. And there's another slice, completely independent. And we are trying to advocate for a more coherent system that covers the entire path that they follow. So it's just a different approach.
And so looking at them from an entire life cycle of, they start here, they go here. Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, let's say there's a freemium business operates using a free plan or a free trial, maybe. Let's do the free trial, a common one. So the first segment would be trials. Then there would be paying customers. Then there would be canceled users. That's the key ones. On top of that, you can have advanced users as like a subsegment of the paying customers. Or you can take the same journey and think what happens before that. So sometimes you would run your marketing email list and your customer email list in the same software. And then you would have leads. Then you would have hot leads that are ready for sale. And then it would smoothly convert into trials. So something like that.
And how do you think about creating messaging for each of those different segments or different stages in a customer's or prospect's lifecycle?
So each segment usually has its own conversion goal, and you're moving them to convert to the next stage of their journey. And for for an info product business, this conversion can happen just once from a lead to to a paying customer, to the buyer. And that's all. That's the only conversion we are striving for. So it seems easy, but in that journey that we described, first you need to convert leads into trials. So you will be sending a campaign to them to nurture those leads. Then the warm leads will be moved to a evergreen sales campaign. So you would hopefully convert them into a trial, make them sign up for the product. And then once they do that, the goal for the trials is to activate them, to onboard them, and to make them become paying customers. Then once people join the paying customers, you quit the onboarding sequence and put them into another sequence. And now your goal with them is to make them more successful. So that would be, tips, tricks, customer success calls, anything else. Then when people are with you for a long time, you would then put them into a customer loyalty sequence, which no SaaS companies do because they really don't have enough resources. That's a wonderful excuse. So a lot of customer loyalty opportunities are there in the middle of the life cycle for people who have been solid users of yours for a while, and so on and so forth. The canceled users, your goal with them is to learn why they quit and maybe bring them back. So things like that. Once they join a specific segment, you would have a goal that you're working towards. So the whole campaign would be designed into multiple emails to do that for them, with them, to help them do it for you.
Fair. Can you talk to me about your process for, say, designing or writing an email? So say we've got somebody in the maybe the qualification stage, they're I can't remember the term you used. Let's say they're marketing qualified, or they've come in through a lead form. They've hit some sort of trigger to say, hey, we think this person's qualified. What's your process for creating, I guess, one, the trigger, and then two, the email copy that would go to that individual?
There is no silver bullet. We do have templates, of course, but most times it's about knowing what makes your target audience click, what problems they experience. So you want to move them gradually from low level of awareness to higher levels of awareness. For marketing leads, for example, the common strategy is through multiple emails, help them diagnose the problem. And I'm not the author of this framework. It's by Brennan Dunn. He's done a great workshop with us this year. Tell them how to diagnose the problem, tell them what the solution can be, tell them how the solution would look like if they do it themselves without the use of software or yourself, and then bridge that towards your solution. And that's a framework that includes 10 emails. So obviously each of these emails would be like a standalone piece of content. It can have advice, it can have case studies, tips, anything that would help people get value. It's all about value and relevance, to be honest.
Totally. I love how it kind of respects I'm a Miller Hyman kind of sales rep. I grew up on that stuff, and it really talks about the sort of, what is their buying mode? Are they aware or problem aware? Are they, problem ignorant? Do they even understand they have a problem? Do they have a problem? Do they know they have a problem and they're sort of even keel about it? They don't really care. And I love the way that you're thinking about, I guess, addressing all of those and using the email sequence or a sequence of emails to open up that gap and say, this is what life is like now, but this is what it could be, in just over a couple of emails. And I think that's one thing that is probably not really talked a lot about, and how to do that in sales development.
In email marketing, we have specific things that can be used to make this more relevant. For example, in the lead nurture sequence that we described, you should be keeping in mind what action they did first. So the sequence will depend on what kind of lead magnet they downloaded. You might have several sequences with different level of awareness. Even though, to be honest, the common advice then is to test multiple and just have one winner and remove the rest for clarity. But nonetheless, you should tailor your messaging to what they did for next, what they did in the previous step. And that's more often than not the only reliable way to understand where exactly they are. So if they downloaded a checklist for picking the best email tool, that probably means they're in purchasing mode, and your sequence will look different compared to something else which is more top of the funnel stuff.
Totally fair. And I'm curious, we started talking about segmenting and sort of segmenting based on the use case or where they are. How does you mentioned customer data. How do you weave that into your like email sequence or into a journey or into the segmentation?
So the way a lot of marketers think about SaaS email is that they're going to do it in the same way as marketing email. They will upload static CSV, maybe with some extra properties, and things will just start to magically work. But for a living, breathing SaaS product with living, breathing customers, it just doesn't work this way. And you need a real-time data integration that will sync customer behavior data from your application, either backend through the API or through a customer data platform like Segment, that will sync this data from your product to the mailing tool that you're using. And this is just not obvious to everybody from day one. But that's the data you need for things to work. Because if somebody does something in your app and their number of projects moves from 0 to 50, that's exactly what's going to trigger those automations. That's going to put them from like one segment of inactive users to another of advanced users and other things like that. So this kind of data problem is intimidating for many, as you might imagine. Just grasping the concept is pretty hard, not to mention thinking like what data you might need. Because what a marketer has to do, they have to build this data tracking plan, it's called, and understand what's going to go into that, take those properties they need, go to their engineer and ask them for an integration. And getting that right from the first take is virtually impossible if you don't know like what you're doing. So we recommend to go a little bit backwards and start planning those segments first. And then after planning the segments, you will know what exact criteria will help you to define those segments. So it's almost like a checklist for making your data correct, that you can actually deploy that data and define segments and campaigns based on it. So segments are like the magic key to unlocking customer data, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Tell me more about how you go about planning your segments. If this is you said no silver bullets, but here's a magic key. So
magic key, like a starting point. Yeah. Segments, data, and campaigns are like chicken and egg, just 3 of them. And the marketer is faced with a problem like where to start. So start with the segments. That's how we suggest you to do it. And we recommend to, well, if you haven't, talk to your customers, understand what stages they go through, and just map the customer journey like UX people do, from trial to paying customer, etc. Also helps to, probably business owners can easily map that, but anybody who has been, for example, setting up your billing system can help you with the nitty-gritty details on that, on how exactly people move through the journey. Because it's not just mental segments, they're actually people going from one status to another in terms of their billing, in terms of their subscription status, etc.
Super interesting. I want to be respectful of your time, and I also I understand that we've got somebody on the podcast that runs a company that does email automation. I know you can't share all the customer data, but I did want to ask you, without sharing their names, can we maybe talk about some examples of just absolutely outstanding metrics or email results that you've seen, and maybe what you thought their was one of the some of the keys to their success?
We are doing a very poor job there, to be honest. I don't think I can make you happy with a good case study there. So
Yeah.
usually, a lot of our businesses are going from 0 to 1 in their email automation, and usually that doesn't involve, getting spectacular 10x outcomes on conversion. And to
Mhm.
be 100% honest, measuring the effectiveness of your emails versus people just doing their thing without any intervention. It's pretty hard because in order to truly measure the impact of onboarding emails, for example, you'd have to compare two very narrow cohorts of people. One would be people who have received your email, opened and clicked, and but didn't do anything, and those who received, opened and clicked, and did do something.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm getting it wrong, but basically it's not just comparing people who click the email versus the rest of the people. That would be completely incorrect. That you need to put these comparisons in like fair conditions, so nobody does it, like nobody. And
Yeah, it's really hard to
it's
just isolate a single variable
yeah,
for
it
a lot of things like
also,
this.
like, 1 month your leads might be coming from one source, another month they might be coming from another source. It might be September when everybody wants their new email marketing platform, like,
Hmm.
but the previous 3 months have been super quiet, and you never know what exactly, if the influence of that is due to email or due to seasons or whatever not. So it's really hard, but it's really silly not to try, because
Hmm.
it's obviously a direct channel into people's inboxes. So
You mentioned seasonality. I mean, we've seen this as well. We had just the first couple weeks of September were absolutely the craziest in terms of leads coming in that I think
isn't
we've
it
ever seen.
fantastic? Yeah.
Fantastic. Followed up by the worst week. Like it just went like crazy and then down to zero to the point where we're like, check everything. We broke something. Nothing broke. It was just variance. How do you think about like variance versus sort of seasonality? Is there a silver bullet? Is there a key? Is there, or do I just sit there going, yeah, it's just variance? I hope.
Well, I'd love to flip the table and see if what you do with seasonality.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I think it's so much is dependent on the context of the market, and like what's going on. And it's one of those things where you're kind of stacking probabilities of like, well, I think it's 10% related to this, and 10% chance it's related to this, 10% chance it's related to that. We definitely look at historical benchmarks. We've got 10 years of data on historicals. But then when you go back 7 years ago, well, we were using a different system here, and we had a different sales setup, and we had a different pricing mix, and so it can be challenging to go back too far, especially when you don't understand the context of the data. Because if I were to step out and somebody else were to step in and look back, they're like, "Oh, wow, you had a huge spike here," but I'm like, "Oh, well, yeah, that was the first year we went to SaaStr, right? Like, of course, like 300 and whatever badge scans are going to come in." But you'll notice they didn't do a whole ton. I'm not saying SaaStr was bad, just like the badge scan approach of like pulling in marketing leads at SaaStr or calling them marketing leads when they're really just badge scans was not the most effective. And so I think there is an element of seasonality that we've seen for our offering, and sometimes those are on um, like we've got two different offerings, and they can be on conflicting schedules, which is kind of handy. But it can also drive your sales team crazy when you've got one person that handles one offering. They're like, why are they getting all the good leads? It's like, well, no, it's just June happens to be more coaching friendly, and September and January happen to be more, sales outsourcing, driven. People are really thinking about that at certain times. And so I think to me, it comes down to use case, to like company history and understanding when the big conferences are happening. Yeah, I brought up SaaStr because we thought there's a 10% chance that the drop in activity was related to people being at SaaStr and just not just being distracted
Oh,
that week.
interesting. Interesting.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because you can't go and interview those people that should have converted or that converted. You can talk to people that converted later, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't have a great answer.
We once did a batch of customer interviews with people who could be ideal customers but weren't. So like non-customer interviews. That was interesting.
Hmm. What brought up that idea?
Um,
Like,
was a couple years ago, and we were just figuring out how to improve our product market fit, because only marketing books say that you go from 0 to 1 in product market fit, but it's not like that. It's a scale, like it's a spectrum. So we were like somewhere in the middle of that spectrum. We were trying to figure out what people want, and
mhm.
we were once again pretty amazed with the variety of different email setups people can have and how they mix and match different tools to meet their needs. So as a result of that, we did swap our product direction a little bit. We allowed our tool to handle both marketing and customer email under one roof, even
Mhm.
though 3 years prior to that, we were super stubborn about keeping that cleanly only for customer email. But yeah, people said otherwise.
Yeah, it's funny, and the more that you read, the more it's like, oh, product market fit is binary. You have it or you don't.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of companies are. I mean, we've seen it firsthand through like helping probably 700 or 800 companies build teams internally. Um, like it's a broad spectrum. Some have extreme hypergrowth product market fit. Like when
Good
we
for them.
ran, yeah, like we did email campaigns for Uber when they first launched Uber Eats, and their reply rates were they like broke all our benchmarks and metrics. Like we had to like filter that data out because they got like a over 50% reply rate. Like it was like a 70-80% reply rate in some markets and like a 40 something percent conversion rate to accepted meeting. You're like crazy town. Um, but yeah, that's hyper growth product market fit and a very strong brand attached to it. Whereas like
Yeah.
getting to that, I mean, Uber is a very different story than I think most people that are going to be listening to this. But yeah, the product market fit being on a spectrum is absolutely something that we found true. And I love that you were continuing to do those interviews to help refine the way that you sort of segmented your audience there.
Thank you. And we keep doing that. Every day we learn something new from customer conversations, and we try to apply that, try to put that in our sales copy and other things. It's
Mhm.
interesting, but honestly, it might be different for more developed markets, but for us, picking the right words to describe what we do has been a huge challenge over the years. And we've been going in circles and circles, so we're getting there, but it's like a spiral, more like refining.
Yeah. Hopefully you're spiraling towards, and it's
Yeah,
getting better.
it feels so. Yeah, thank you.
It is amazing. I think it's I'm looking for the book because I think I had it right here. No, that's not the book. Um, oh
Obviously
man,
awesome.
that's it.
There you go.
I'm like, it's an orange book, and I got a big pile right here. Oh, it's back there. Yeah. And I love how they talk about, it's essentially finding the words to describe what you're doing, niching down to a point where you can own your own vertical. Um, and like finding that like couple of words to to describe that's going to like instantly help customers put you into that right spot. I'm curious, what have you experimented with and like where are you now with those words?
It's lovely that you brought up that book because I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago when the book came out, we did the exercise, and we had the early copy from one of our co-founders. We did the exercise step by step, and we wrote a huge blog post about it, which still ranks for April Dunford very well. And we did the
No way.
exercise, and we put out like the actual material, what we did, including the big table of things and others. And we arrived at the point that we're going to call ourselves a customer messaging platform, and we stuck with that positioning for a couple years. But what ultimately works, now that we learned, is just going down to plain email service provider, like email automation, email marketing platform, because that's an existing category. People know what to expect from it, and customer messaging is just too vague of a definition for what we do. even though the product didn't like revolutionary change. We just kept evolving throughout the time. But these days, we call ourselves an email automation platform, and that rings a bell much better than customer messaging, even though we did the drill. So keep doing the drill. I guess that's the takeaway.
Oh, awesome. I love that you read the book and wrote like invested so much in getting the content out there. That's awesome. And that kind of the journey from, trying to be very, very specific and all the way back to email automation. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. I wonder because you started with customer messaging platform and it was largely internal.
Um, it was never internal. Like customer
Okay.
messaging is supposed to deliver messages to your customers through the channels that
Mhm.
you provide. And we had email and in-app notifications. We still have them. So
Okay.
uh, but customer messaging is not just about delivering messages, it's also about chatting and or not chatting. And we never provided chat, and we never really wanted to. I don't think we will. Maybe you can take me up on that in 5 years, but not at the moment. We're like one-way automation
Mhm.
focused. Um, on day one, when we put up like the launch page when we got together in 2017, it was called Lightweight Email Automation. Then we went to customer messaging, and now we're full circle back to email marketing automation, which is like I would never think that we're gonna start an email service provider. It's just so hard. But this is where we ended up because it's a known market, even though a competitive one.
Yeah, totally fair. I bet you have so much fun with email deliverability too.
Well, it's one of the aspects, yeah. When Rob Walling sold Drip and we were just starting up with Userlist, Rob
Mhm.
did a big interview saying something like, I'm never going to do anything with email again. And we were like, oh, interesting.
Uh-oh.
Here we go. Yeah. I wonder why. And now I think I know why, but we're too deep in the journey. It's actually working. So we have to persevere and keep on.
Totally. I'm curious if there's anything you've learned about email deliverability, just as a last kind of piece before we bring it all together.
Email deliverability, I'm not an expert in that, but ultimately I just interviewed an expert last week specifically about deliverability. Do well by your customers. Do what should be done. Don't do what shouldn't be. Like don't subscribe to people to lists without their consent. Respect their opt-in. Do good content. Don't do cold email. Well, cold email is a big risk for your domain reputation. And
Hmm.
our previous recommendation was to use a separate domain, like not useless.com, but getuseless.com for your, let's say, cold outreach. But that expert said that today's inbox providers are actually smart enough to understand what links go in your emails. And even
Hmm.
if you send cold emails from another domain, that doesn't mean they can't see that this is promoting useless. So be careful about everything.
Totally. I think links in general in cold email can be a very challenging one. Um, yeah, I've definitely seen a case where they've sent so much cold email with their domain name in all of that cold email that unique
Mm-hmm.
string of their domain name, I can't even remember what it was, but it was a long time ago, got like flagged as a spam word. So if you were on any uh, any other client's domain, and as a test, if we put that word anywhere in the email, that email will go to spam. And so
Yeah.
it's definitely something you have to be careful with, especially at volume, especially even on a fresh domain. It's getting more and more challenging to do stuff like that.
Yeah,
But
however, we should respect the AI that does all of this for email providers, because if it wasn't for that, our inboxes would have been completely unmanageable and full of bad email. And you don't want that It's
Yeah.
2022. Spammers have been out for 20 years, and we still can perfectly fine like use the email. That's a good achievement.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Google with TensorFlow, I think everybody, marketers and salespeople, cold email all together saw like a big drop. And it's been kind of up and down on like, I definitely have had instances where like obvious spam is getting into my regular inbox, whereas um, legitimate email is ending up in the spam box. And so I don't envy the problem of having to discern between marketing email, cold email, and spam, phishing, all of these things.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Jane, I know we're talking about segmentation. Any last sort of comments or advice to people on segmentation before we call it today?
Uh, do segmentation, like do. um, just we're writing an article today about how people should run their email if they have giant email lists and like high volume things. For example, if they run a freemium product, and the key to everything is segmentation, because you can't like in 2022 you can't just blast your list with broadcasts and call that email marketing. It's much smarter.
Mhm.
You have to follow the journey. So map the journey, map your segments, and do your best. And it doesn't have to be complex. You just need to map out 2, 3 key segments, and that will be already fantastic.
That sounds awesome. Jane, where are we going to be able to track down that blog post that you're writing?
Userlist.com/blog is coming out next week, hopefully.
Perfect. And this podcast will probably be coming out after that's been published. So it should be live now. Well, not now when you're listening to this now. All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Great.
Jane, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Colin, for having us.
Thanks everybody for listening, and we'll see you next week.